Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. The topic of my presentation today is Propiska as a tool of discrimination in Central Asia. Propiska being a residency registration system, a very specific type of it. I have been working on this topic for 2 years now. Last year, while conducting research on ineffectiveness of Propiska as a policy in Kazakhstan, I realized that there is very little research on this topic. And I think that it is very undeservingly so, because Propiska is a big issue in 3 ways. First, it's a big issue geographically. It covers most of the post-Soviet space. Secondly, it is big in terms of population. Every single citizen of those states should register. And thirdly, access to most of the basic human rights, political, economic, social, or cultural, depend on the ability of these citizens to obtain Propiska. So when I came here, I decided that it would be very interesting to cover this issue for the international community, especially for the international human rights organizations, as I think it's exactly their topic. The topic of my presentation today is one aspect of my paper, and the question is why I think Propiska is a discrimination tool. I base my research on a series of interviews with international and local experts, with human rights activists, with lawyers, with government workers, and on a survey which I conducted last year in the capital of Kazakhstan, Astana, with internal migrants. Tradition of Propiska goes back to the Tsarist serfdom institution, where it was used as a tool to attach serfs to their lords, but it reached its heyday during the Soviet Union, where it was used as a heart of administrative system of providing very limited goods and services to the population. It also was a very useful tool of controlling movement of population and ensuring that the right people are at the right places. However, with Perestroika in 1991, Propiska was recognized unconstitutional as violating the right of citizens to freedom of movement. Today, population registration systems are quite common around the world. However, why I talk about Propiska? Because Propiska is a very specific type of registration system. It's not a mere registration. It's a tool of population control. You can see on this table a whole range of basic human rights which are tied to Propiska. It is access to education, access to healthcare, freedom of movement, access to justice, access to legal employment, access to even having identification documents like passports or certificate of birth, or even you cannot die without having Propiska. You cannot have a certificate of death. And the problem is that not every citizen can access registration. Not every citizen is allowed to obtain Propiska. In Almaty, only 10% of internal migrants had Propiska. In Bishkek, 20% of residents live without Propiska. And in Tashkent, capital of Uzbekistan, around 1 million of people reside there without having Propiska. So while governments say that Propiska is needed to provide basic services to the population, I argue that those who suffer the most from Propiska are exactly those who should be protected. It's internal migrants, refugees, internally displaced people, homeless people, orphanage, graduates, young and large families. Moreover, Propiska has a control function in it. Governments say that they need Propiska to control spontaneous migration, to prevent terrorism, crime. But as everyone knows, the crime and the terrorists are the first ones who will find their way to avoid the system, to bypass the system. You can see here the results of my survey. 22 respondents said that they paid for Propiska. It's very easy to avoid it. Not the terrorists, but even simple citizens can avoid it. And they paid for Propiska in order to obtain employment, education, healthcare, identification documents, simple things, not a crime. This is a very interesting case. I found it funny because I created this infographic last year for a newspaper article. And I found it very recently in a very unexpected for myself place. It's an advertisement site called market.kz where a person proposes to register for money at his apartment and uses my infographic as argument, saying that you cannot access this and this and these services without buying Propiska from me. So as this funny case shows, people easily bypass the system. There are two ways to do so. Firstly, it's inclusive way, and secondly, exclusive way. Inclusive way is to buy Propiska, to bribe a police officer, for example, or officer at the population registration office, or you can use personal connections. This is the safest way usually. Exclusive way is to avoid any legal interaction with the state. So by doing so, you are excluded from the state's distribution networks. You're illegal in your own state, being a citizen of its state. But yeah. So when there is demand, there is a supply. We know it. And 23% of my respondents said that they faced extortion from police officers, from officers at the population services centers, from healthcare, from employees of healthcare institutions and education institutions. Moreover, it's even worse in Tashkent, capital of Uzbekistan, where 98% of migrants said that they constantly pay bribes to police. So there is a series of my recommendations. This is not all of my recommendations, the rest you can find in my paper. But first what I can say is that the government should try to introduce some transparency to the system so that they not exclude the very big part of their population from not only distribution network but also security, security which the government should provide. But also it creates some shadow economy where those people who are not registered, they're invisible to the system. So firstly, the government should try to untie social services from residency, so that citizenship would be the only condition for those citizens to get access to the social services. Secondly, international experience can be very useful. For example, experience of the Baltic states, which they employed while getting rid of their Propiska systems in the 90s and 2000s. They introduced population registries and attached personal identification numbers to every citizen of their state. And I think it looks difficult, but in fact, most of the Central Asian states already introducing such systems. To some degree, more or less, every state of the Central Asia are trying to introduce personal identification numbers, e-governments. So by using personal identification number, a bureaucrat which is competent to access this information can know where the person is in the online regime. However, the confidentiality of the citizen should be the priority while developing such systems. The last recommendation for the state agencies would be to fiscal resources, the budget which is allocated to each citizen for his healthcare or education, etc., should follow the citizen. So when the citizen moves, he takes with himself the budget. For example, when he moves to another city and he wants to go to hospital, it will bring the budget with him. So he allocates this budget to this hospital. This will not only introduce transparency to the system, but also will create some more welcoming attitude for the municipalities which receive the migrants. It also might create some quality, might improve the quality of these public services which are provided to the to the citizens, because it will create a competition between those hospitals, for example. And another part of my recommendation is for NGOs and international organizations. I would recommend to provide some more research on the issue, because it is really under research. You can, so these organizations may work with fellow international organizations to provide some awareness about the issue. They also can work with the states and the urban population on bringing down the myth about necessity of Propiska, about its effectiveness, and also they can work with at-risk groups, helping them to register, to know their rights, and to fight for those rights. Assistance in developing population registries might be very helpful. Technical expertise and financial assistance on fiscal reform might be also very helpful, like World Bank did while helping China to develop alternative ways for their hukou system, which is very similar, actually, the alternative to Propiska in China today. Thank you for your attention, and I hope to have some questions. Have a nice evening.